Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us on this effort we call Africa Reconnection. And today we are discussing a very, very interesting topic, goat production. You know that goats are everywhere, particularly in the rural areas. We know that for a very long time, people have regarded goats as animals for the poor. And today I'm joined by Chief K, Masimba Biriwasha. Thank you very much for being on the show, and he's going to clear or demystify everything that we have heard about goats.
Thank you very much. I'm very delighted to be here.
Fantastic. You are the founder of Goat Orders. Can you tell us some of the work that you do?
Yeah, so I founded Goat Orders in 2020. Co-founded it actually with a friend of mine, Brian Zulu. He's based in the United Kingdom at the moment. We registered it in Zimbabwe in 2019, November. And then we started operating right at the height of COVID in May 2020. Essentially, what we tried to do was to really jumpstart access to goat meat in Zimbabwe by going straight to the marketplace. We wanted to bring goats to the dinner plate of Zimbabweans because we identified a significant problem which still exists. So we started off by opening an online shop and a physical shop at White House, where we were providing access to goat meat. Customers could walk into our butchery and buy goat meat, and so we would buy goats from different parts of the country, from smallholder farmers, process them and make them available in the shop. And it was interesting. We found out at that time that there is currently no meat charts for goat. Even at the government level, as you would find for, say, chicken, sheep, cattle, or pigs. But for goats, those are non-existent. So that's part of what we were trying to solve with establishing goat orders. So essentially, we're trying to intervene in goat production and value addition.
Post-COVID, how is the business going?
Post-COVID, to be honest, the business unraveled. It was very difficult to keep the business going. So at some point in August 2023, I decided to close the business because the supply chain was broken. And I discovered at that time that there is a lot of legwork that has to be done to build the supply chain of goats in Zimbabwe. We have to go back to the farmers, to the smallholder farmers. You have to talk about transportation, abattoir services, cold storage. One of the problems that I didn't talk about that we faced at Goat Orders was just power supply. Cold storage, distribution, labor, all those factors came into play and really affected the business. So I decided that it was time to take stock of what I'd learned and try to take some corrective measures and then come back again.
Obviously, it was not without its own lessons. What are some of those lessons that you got from this whole venture?
I think one of the key lessons for me was I had a big assumption that smallholder farmers located in different parts of the rural Zimbabwe were interested in selling their goats. And that is not always true. That farmers are interested in selling their goats. They're not. They sell their goats when they like to sell.
When they like and when they've got a need that requires money.
Yeah. So from my experiences, I went around Zimbabwe, met farmers who had like over 200 goats, and you would approach them and they would tell you clearly that they were not selling their goats. After walking like 10, 30, 70 kilometers, one time I walked in Makonde there and arrived at the farmer's house, and he told me straight up that he was not selling his goats, although he had a big flock. So that was one of the major challenges. And then in addition, transportation, logistics is a very big problem, because we're talking about goats located, if we're talking about Harare, we're talking about a radius of about 250 kilometers. So that's where the goats are located. So you need to have transportation, You need to sort out your logistics. You need clearances with the veterinary services, with the police. And it's very difficult to transport the goats to Harare because by then they lose weight and you know, that even affects the meat quality. And then power supply is also a problem. Abattoir services are generally designed in Zimbabwe for beef and for pork, and not so much for goat. Even for chicken, you know, there are abattoirs for chicken. So the costing of abattoir services is too high for goat. So you find at the moment it costs about $8, $9 to slaughter a goat, but that's just like too expensive, and then it just eats into the profit margin that you get from a goat. So and then labor. It's also very difficult at this point in time in Zimbabwe to really build a good team that will support you through all the challenges that you face when you're trying to build a business. And so those are some of the challenges that I faced. And obviously, like accounting, you know, I was like very new into this area, you know, and I realized like I needed to really beef up and strengthen my understanding of what accounts is about, because at the end of the day, you're trying to transform an idea into capital. And part of what you have to do is you have to measure, you know, every cent that you're spending and every cent that is coming in, so that it makes business sense.
You spoke about people have got a perception that when you go in the rural areas, people are ready to sell their goats and sell it for, you know, for a song. But when you go in these rural communities, you find people, you know, having a sizable herd of goats. Is there commercial value in goat farming? Because for them, it would seem like it's a symbol, you know, of status, rather than something that they do so that they can, you know, earn a decent livelihood.
Yeah. So, well, it's been said that the goat is a poor man's cow, you know, and I think that's a misnomer. I think that kind of language needs to change. You know, I think the goat ought to be given more respect. But coming back to your question, generally, people don't have a lot of goats. From my experience, what we found was that farmers in rural Zimbabwe generally have a flock of between, you know, 1 to 20, 1 to 30, you know, 50, and then you get the outliers, you know, like with about 200 goats in areas like Mbire, you know, like in the valley areas of Zimbabwe, Mzarabani, Mushumbi area there.
Exactly, yes.
There you get farmers with like 200 goats, but even there, you know, they're outliers. Most of them have got less than 50 goats. So what they tend to do is they're not ready to just sell off these goats, because I think they recognize the value of the goats, and they treat them as someone said as a village bank. So it's like an ATM machine, if you come to think of it. So they sell the goats like when they have a specific problem, or like when they're faced with a specific problem. Say like it could be school fees. It could be like a funeral, or it could be like a health situation at the household. That's when they are ready to sell.
Yeah.
So
and it's easier to sell a goat than a cow.
Exactly. It's easier to let go a goat than a cow. And usually they can sell like within the village. What we found is when we went into the rural areas with my team, we would have to travel a lot of kilometers to say even get like 50 goats or 70 goats. It would take us anything up to a week or 2 weeks to try and get that number, you know, just because farmers would be, or these producers would be selling maybe like 1 or 2 goats or 3 goats at the most. So in terms of commercial value, I don't think there is any understanding of the commercial value of goats, as it were, among the smallholder producers. But there is commercial value to goats in general. So we've got to differentiate, because the middlemen that are going to gather these goats obviously see a lot of value in these goats. And when they bring them after consolidating into urban markets, they're definitely making some kind of a profit. But the business could be structured better.
We have seen, an influx of foreign breeds coming onto the market to try and improve our genetics. Is there anything that can be done with our breeds? Because naturally, they adapt very well to our environment and conditions, I would assume. And when people bring in foreign breeds, they also come with their own load of, management demands.
Okay, so let me try and approach that question from a couple of angles. So number one, there is nothing inherently wrong with our local breeds. The Mashono breed, the Matabele breed, there is actually nothing wrong with them. There's this assumption that they need to get bigger in size. And I totally understand that, especially when you're at the sort of like the business that I was in, because it's actually a business of weights, right? Like when I get a carcass into the into the butchery, it has to have a certain amount of weight for it to
make economic sense.
Fair and fine. But if you look at the Mashono goat and the way that it is raised today in some of these areas that I'm talking about, it definitely makes a lot of business sense, because these guys are not injecting a lot of inputs into growing their goats. They're almost using the hand of God to grow their goats.
To just let them be.
Yeah, they let them be, and they and they use natural grass, and the natural veld. The natural veld grows those goats. So it's not surprising that they would be willing to sell their goats for $18, $20, $25, and they're making a profit because they haven't really
invested
a lot.
Of,
now,
management,
this helps me to answer the second part of the question about this fascination with exotic breeds, and it's generally three breeds. We're talking about and they're from literally like from one family. When you look into the history of, how they were modified, those goats, the Savannah, we're talking the Kalahari Red and the Boer goat. And they're really like one thing. In some areas, in some countries, they were actually like recognized as one thing. Australia specifically, which is the lead goat producing or exporting country. These breeds, they've got their own challenges, like you've correctly said. And yes, they've got greater weights, but you've got to manage them right. You need extra feed, extra medication, you need extra care, you need to have proper housing. You can't just let them out into the wild like we do with our goats. So this over fascination with the exotic breeds, I think it's misplaced. I think we've got to look at the model that these smallholder farmers are using and then replicate that and then scale that up, like fixing some parts. For example, I feel like the way that the goat is raised in Zimbabwe is completely atrocious. What do I mean by that? The goat is the most disregarded and most overlooked of domestic animals in this country. I think there's an issue to do with animal rights there when you're talking about goats, the way that they're looked after. I think farmers need to change their approach to goat production. We need to build better structures. The goats are kept in filth, so to speak. There is no care for the kids. So we've got a high mortality rate in Zimbabwe, stretching to anything between 20 to 60%. Some studies have shown. So it means like what these smallholder farmers or these rural-based farmers are not doing is they're not growing their businesses because they're not taking care of the next generation of goats that are being put into their hands. They're letting the kids die so much, and part of the reason is just the structures. The structures are so backward, for lack of a better term, and that's part of what needs to change. And I think if we could fix those parts, that model can be commercialized instead of simply thinking that the foreign breeds are the ones that are a silver bullet to goat production in the country.
Looking at the current, environmental challenges we have, what are some of the, regenerative strategies that rural farmers need to implement in order to make sure that they improve the management of goats?
Yeah, so at the moment, the biggest sort of type of goat farming that is done in rural areas is extensive goat production, right? Like you just literally just open the pen and you let your goats
go
go
and graze.
and graze. And if you look at this particular season here in Zimbabwe, it was very dry with very few rains in the past season. So our pastures have dried out. So you find then that your goats then have to travel long distances, which also affects the quality of the meat and the quality of the goats, and then it also comes back to this weight issue. So I think part of what the regenerative process that farmers need to implement is number one, build better pens and build like enclosures, like let's say a hectare size of an enclosure, so that your goats then don't have to travel long distances. Farmers should be encouraged to harvest hay, let's say between May to June, so that they harvest hay. So they've got extra sources of hay that they can use, particularly between the months of July to December, before the rains come. They need to be encouraged to grow certain types of fast-growing plants. For example, mulberries. Mulberry is a plant, one of the plants that comes out first, in the summer, and it provides shade and it provides feed for goats. Farmers need to be encouraged to grow things like the small grains, because there's extras that can be harvested from those small grains that can be used to feed goats, and some of these small grains thrive in these very difficult extreme climatic conditions. There's a crop that is also fantastic. It's cassava. I know that it's not very respected in this country, but cassava is a very interesting crop because it's very drought resistant, and at the same time, you can actually harvest a material that you can use to feed your goats. So there's a lot of strategies that farmers can implement. I think the idea of keeping goats using the extensive farming system could be counterproductive. I think it's counterproductive anyway, in the sense that, particularly during the rain season, when everyone starts planting, you see what happens is, in most areas, there's actually like tethering of goats, which is completely a no-no for me. We need to stop that habit of tethering, like tying our goats to one specific place. You find that practice is still prevalent in the country, or goats are kept in the pen forever, whereas what I'm suggesting is build this 1 hectare or 50 by 50 meter enclosure, and you can allow your goats to come out of there and then play within that enclosure. And then you also then cut grass, which you then feed the goats in there. And then you can also have better attention to the kidding process, to separating the bucks and the mothering goats and the kids. So you can even it can also improve the management process.
The management process.
Yeah.
There is a lot of noise that's being made in terms of cattle management than goats. And farmers have got a lot of options when it comes to cattle management. But nothing is being said about goats. And from what you are just saying, it's still the same process. The way you manage your cattle is the same way that you need to manage your goats.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think pretty much. I mean, it's the same process. There is this misnomer or this myth, fallacy that goats are easy, that
They're
goats
cheaper to
that
raise.
that they're cheaper to raise. I think it's this whole notion of goats being like a poor man's cow, which I said is a very wrong framing
That
of what
mindset has to be.
Yes, that mindset has to shift. Goats are not a poor man's cow. Goats need attention. Goats need big attention. Now you're making me like make reference to this scripture, which I always like make reference to, which essentially talks about goats, and it's Proverbs 27, 23 to 27. It's interesting when you go to that. One of the things that it talks about is giving attention to your flocks. Making sure you know and understand, how your flock is doing. And that takes money, that takes time, it takes labor, it takes
resources,
serious commitment. So the idea that goats are just so easy to do, you go online on YouTube, social media, there is so many of these like vloggers that are pushing this idea that you can make millions from goats. I don't think it's I don't think it's true. I think, to be honest, let's like debunk that, and I'm happy that you invited me to your podcast, and let's debunk that. And here's what I will say: goats are a legacy project. They require time. At the very least, if you've got 100 goats, females, it's going to take you 8 months to really get a result. The gestation period of a goat is like 5 months, 6 months. Then after 6 months, it takes you 8 months for those goats that have given birth or that have been born to mature. So we're talking about 6 months plus another 8 months. That's almost 14 months.
Yeah.
That's almost a year and a half, right? That's a year and a half before you've seen any return from the goat project.
Yeah.
And then what kicks in if you put in the attention that is required, what kicks in at some point, if you put in the attention, the commitment, the time, the labor, the leadership that is required, is the compound growth. And the compound growth will start kicking in after about 3, 4, 5 years. So we're talking 5 years. You need to commit 5 years to a goat project. Because if you start off with 100 goats and I'm running a butchery, and next year I come to your project, and because at my shop, we're selling like 50 to 70, 80 goats a week. So I would come and kill your pen immediately. So I think goats are a long-term project, not a short-term money generating like silver bullet kind of approach that is paraded in many of these blogs and vlogs that we see on social media. It's a long-term project. It's a legacy project. I think it requires time.
What are some of the products that we can actually get from goats? Can you take us through the value addition chain of goat production?
Yeah. I just want to say I'm very fascinated by the title of your podcast. It's Africa Connection, and goats play a very significant part in our psychosocial reality. The goat plays a very spiritual role, particularly here in Zimbabwe. So that's part of the value chain. Like they've got this social cultural element they play, right?
Indeed.
And then so it's a multi-use animal. So we get we can get from the skin. We can process leather from the skin. We can also get milk from goats, certain breeds, obviously. Some people harvest raw pharmaceutical products from goats, which then they use to process certain pharmaceuticals. You can process pet food from the blood when you slaughter the goat, and then from the milk there's a lot more that you can process there. You can do soap, you can do milk, you can do
cheese,
you can do chocolate, you can do sweets. So there's a lot there.
But interestingly, we can't find goat milk on the market in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. You're right. So this is why I'm always saying I question like some people are selling goat soap. Either they're importing it, but there is definitely no serious goat milk farmers yet in the country.
In the country, yeah.
But that's an area that needs to be explored significantly. Goat milk is definitely an area that has got a lot of return in my view.
And there are a lot of byproducts that you can then get from there as well.
But it also requires upfront investment. So that's the thing about goat. I think as we round off that, yes, there is this whole potential, but this whole potential to harvest it is going to require some upfront investment. So and we cannot just continue to talk about the goat as just being a poor man's cow, negating the fact that the things that we need to put in place if we're going to harvest from the goat.
From the goats. Chief K. Masimba Biriwasha, thank you very much for being our guest on Africa Reconnection. And I believe the information that you have just shared with us today will impact a lot of people who are considering getting into goat farming.
Thank you very much.
And most importantly, for them to know that you really need to invest in goat production if you want to realize meaningful return on investment. Thank you very much for coming through. And we call this effort Africa Reconnection. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's make a date for next time. Until then, keep it rural.